here is our agenda. I am very excited to be hearing from Pamela Atwood, the Director of Housing Policy for the North Carolina Housing Coalition. They are going to be talking about the all-important issue of affordable housing, and we all know how that issue deeply affects children and families, and there's really so much to be talked about there, but we're just going to be getting an overview from Pamela and some ideas on ways people can be involved around that particular issue. Then we'll be getting our legislative update from Tiffany Gladney, our policy director here at NC Child. And there is a lot to report on that has been happening in the General Assembly and things that are coming up. So that will be a full discussion as well. And then, of course, we always welcome any updates and announcements before we end the call. So without any further ado, again, I'm going to turn this over to Pamela. I want to say, too, that NC Child is working closely with the North Carolina Housing Coalition, particularly this year, because we have we co-submitted a grant, this Opportunity Starts at Home grant, that is through the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And North Carolina is one of the 8 states across the country that received this grant. And the whole idea is that it's about bringing non-housing policy focused partners more into the mix around housing policy and letting people know what's happening in that arena and how they can get involved, et cetera. Thus, we thought it'd be great to invite Pamela and the coalition to come on and speak to us. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to you, Pamela.
All right. Thank you, Adam. And thank you everyone for joining us this morning. And thank you for inviting us to speak with everyone today. So I am Pamela Atwood. I am the policy director with the North Carolina Housing Coalition. And just a little bit about us. We are a statewide membership and advocacy organization. We are focused on ensuring that all people in North Carolina have access to housing that is safe, stable, affordable, quality, affordable housing across the state. And so I just wanted to speak with you for a few minutes to kind of give a big picture on what's going on in housing across the state. And so I think first it's important, some of you are probably already familiar, but just to talk about what do we mean when we talk about affordable housing, what exactly are, what do those words mean? I think a lot of people throw the words around and we hear them a lot, but what does that mean with regards to housing? And so the most commonly used definition and the one that we use from a policy standpoint, and this is also the definition that most government agencies use, and also just most anything dealing with personal finance. A lot of metrics, these are usually the standards they use, but typically you want your housing costs to be no more than 30% of your income. And the reason for this is pretty simple. It's not overly complicated, but just that with all the other things that that one needs to have resources and use money to live, to survive, having your housing cost no more than 30% is the generally agreed upon standard where you should have enough resources to be able to pay for those other necessities like food, access to healthcare, transportation. And so if you are spending more than that, you're considered to be cost burdened. Severely cost burdened means that you are spending more than 50% of your income towards your rent. And I think it's not hard to imagine, you are walking a very, very tight rope, trying to balance things, and just one expense, one variable that changes from month to month, whether that's the need for some kind of medication, there's a car repair that happens, someone's unable to, you have a missed day of work and you don't have paid time off, all of these things, and suddenly it becomes very hard to pay for all of these things, and you're having to make these trade-offs, whether you decide to not pay pay for utilities, and miss a credit card payment, don't make that car repair, or what have you, or some folks deciding to ration, how many meals a day is your household having. So all of these things go into your housing expenses. And then I don't know if Fawn can pull up the slide that just shows, we've got a slide that just shows a few of the, some basic stats right now across North Carolina. And these stats are from 2019. I know we want to try to get more timely information, and unfortunately, it's fairly difficult. The numbers for what's actually happened in 2020, those numbers aren't going to be available until September. So this is what we're working with, but you can just imagine that with the pandemic and everything that has gone on in the past year and a half, that these numbers have probably worsened. So here in North Carolina, we've got about 27% of all households, that's both renters and homeowners, who are cost burdened. With specifically looking at renters, 43% are cost burdened. 18% of homeowners are cost burdened. And then around the state, the National Income Housing Coalition, they do an annual report that takes a look at the housing supply across the country and then individually in each state. They take a look at what is the supply of housing units and what is affordable to people at different income ranges. And particularly for those who are in the low or very low income range, North Carolina has a deficit of over 373,000 housing units. That's using data from 2019. This has probably only increased that deficit. So for every 100 people in a low income range, they have, there's a small number of units that are actually available for rent that are considered to be affordable for them. And then across the state, $17.67 per hour is the wage that one would need to be able to afford a modest 2-bedroom rental. And that's important to note. Here in North Carolina, the minimum wage is $7.25. You can see that 2 people at minimum wage would not be able to afford a simple 2-bedroom rental property. And then over the past year, 211, which I imagine a lot of people on this call are familiar with, in terms of contacting that assistance line for referrals to different kinds of resources that people are in need of. Over 34% over the past 365 days have been calls for housing or shelter assistance of some kind. And so you can just see that for a lot of individuals, housing is it's out of reach. Especially for those at the lowest income levels, they have great difficulty being able to just manage to survive. Let's see, and these conditions, they existed way before the COVID-19 pandemic began. They've only worsened during this time. I think as we've seen with so many issues, the pandemic has just exacerbated so many conditions. And put additional pressure just put additional pressure on those needs. And so, the reason that we're so concerned with housing, at least for us at the Housing Coalition, we all believe that housing is a human right, that everyone has right to access housing, to have a basic place to live. We don't believe that anyone is more or less deserving of being able to have a safe place to stay every night. That is a basic human need. I majored in psychology in college, and so I always kind of remember like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and just having those basic needs of shelter and food, having those basic needs met is crucial just to being able to survive. If you don't have those basic needs met, it is much more difficult to be able to even to begin to think about things like personal fulfillment and personal enrichment. And so you can just see that housing is such a basic part of one's life. It affects pretty much everything in your life, whether that's the home itself that you live in, the quality and the condition of your living environment, that's definitely going to affect your health. There have been a lot of studies and more research in the past few years showing that direct link. I think here with the pandemic, you see that just from a very simple standpoint when we have this global pandemic with a contagious, one of the first things that medical experts were telling people was to stay at home. If you don't have a home, how can you stay at home and stay safe? And so just from a basic level, there's just being able to stay safe on that level. But also the condition of your home. There are numerous studies that show links to different health conditions, to respiratory problems. That's one of the more obvious ones, but also exposure to lead-based paint and child growth and development. Where your home or where you live, that also determines the kind of environment that you're living in, what kind of air pollution or water pollution, what kind of toxins are you exposed to on a daily basis. And then, we also know that your housing, affects what kind of access you have to different opportunities, to just different aspects of your life, from your school to what kind of jobs are available, what kind of transportation you have access to, what kind of food, what are your nutritional options that are easily available where you live, even what type of banking and financial services you have access to. And then that compounds how much you're able, you're obviously you're budgeting, but what you're able to save, also determines your technology access. And again, another thing that we see with the pandemic, where you live, do you have high-speed internet in the neighborhood you live in? And so all of these things are connected. It's a whole ecosystem of things. I know everyone on this call, does work related to children and how this affects children. Obviously, health is a big direct impact, both just your general well-being, health and well-being, but also children are growing, and these developmental aspects, are a big part of your housing is a big part of that. And then also, there are definitely links to housing and school performance. I think if you can imagine, if your family is moving around a lot and they're insecure in their housing, having to move around or having to live in overcrowded conditions, that obviously is going to affect your school performance. It's going to affect so many different things, mental health. I think most parents don't want to show their children the stress, but children are observant. They do see things. And, even those parents who do their best to try to hide those financial stresses, it is apparent to the children. And I think, mental health is a big aspect is a big thing that is related to housing. And then again, nutrition, just from the simple finances, but also those neighborhood conditions. And, unfortunately, systemic racism is very, very much a part of this. Housing history in the United States is directly tied to a history of racist policies within the government, and then also within, within the financial industry. I think a lot of, one example is redlining. I think it's a very commonly discussed example. And for those that are unfamiliar, it was a practice of not allowing loans to be made to certain homeowners and in certain areas based on the color of your skin. And also these redlining practices also determined where housing was built. I think we focus a lot on the lending aspect of it to individuals, but they also prevented developers who did want to build housing that would be open to people of color. And federal lending practices did not allow those individuals to move forward with those types of projects. Another way that systemic racism has impacted housing, and thus everything else that goes along with housing, is national highway construction. I think a lot of folks in Durham, this story, but in cities across the country, it's unfortunately not a unique story. It happens in every country and every city across the country. There is a story of a neighborhood of people of color being ripped in half or being physically separated from the rest of the community by in the name of, of building a highway. And neighborhoods that were bulldozed to build these highways, families who were displaced to build the highways, and then are physically cut off from others in the community. And so, and then of course, now today, in today's future, this history lives on. The way schools are funded is largely through property taxes. A lot of that in property taxes are related to where housing has been developed and property values. There's so many ways that we can see how this legacy lives on today, how local government is funded, what services are available, and it just goes on, unfortunately. And so obviously children are a big part of that. Children are impacted by all of these decisions. And so there's definitely a lot. I don't, we could go on and on and on for hours, but so some of the things that we're watching right now, I think we're in a very pressurized situation right now. I think there are hundreds of thousands of households across the state who are behind on rent. The numbers vary anywhere from several billion to hundreds of billions across the country. But we've got rental assistance that is stopped right now. I think one of the big concerns that we have right now is getting that program, getting that money back open and moving quickly. North Carolina is sitting on about $546 million in rental assistance and utility assistance that could go to help people who need it now. And I think we're very concerned that the state is moving slowly on getting these resources out. And then there are a few bills that we're watching. One that I think folks should be aware of right now relates to the definition of transient occupancy. The hotel and travel industry has put language in two different bills here in North Carolina that would define transient occupancy as anything less than 90 days. And so what typically happens is if you exceed 90 days, you would be considered to be a tenant. And instead of being kind of covered under what is typical kind of transient occupancy, hotel lodging regulations, you would be covered under typical landlord tenant law. And so if a hotel operator wanted to remove you, they would need to go through the typical eviction process. They would need to follow that process instead of just having you removed. And the concern that we have is that this definition is going to encourage hotel operators to either force individuals to move who have been living in hotels or motels as their primary residence. They will move individuals from one room to another, on the 88th or the 87th day, so that they can say now they have a new contract and they're no longer a resident, and just keep moving people around so that they can't access those rights. And so that's a bill that we're watching, and that one has immediate impact right now. I know a lot of individuals, and even before the pandemic began, but it's only gotten worse, people turning to those kinds of properties and facilities for housing because it is the only housing that they can access. And there are numerous reasons why that's the case, but and it's certainly not ideal. In terms of some of the things you can do, I will say, I would encourage you to join our new group that we've formed. It's called the Advocate Circle. And it's a group that is trying to engage individuals who are not a part of the typical housing industry world to get involved in housing issues, because there is so much connectivity and all of these issues are so related to each other. And we thought it was important to make sure that we are giving space for people to get involved in housing policy, because it's desperately needed right now. Some of the other things that people can get involved with, I think, is just raising housing as an issue related to whatever to the focus of your work, there's definitely going to be a connection to housing in some way. And I think the more awareness of that will help with address some of these housing issues. And so I think I will stop there. And if there's any questions.
Yeah. Pamela, thanks so much. That was very helpful, to kind of level set on what are some of the issues around affordable housing in North Carolina, and what are some ways to be involved. It would make my day if we had 5 or 6 people chime into the chat box saying they would be interested in joining the Housing Advocates Circle. And we can make sure and get folks connected there. I think there was a few questions that popped up. Fawn, we got about 5 minutes for questions.
Yeah, so let's take a couple of these sort of clarifying questions. Leslie Kellenberger was asking about the definition of transient occupancy. So Pamela, you were mentioning that this bill would, I think, change it to 90 days. What's the current definition?
So, and I'm not a lawyer, so I will start with that first. But my understanding is that in North Carolina, we don't have a definition, but the court precedent in different court cases that has been pretty stable. Most judges have found that if you are residing in a hotel or a motel or RV park or what have you, for more than 90 days, that they typically would consider you to be a tenant. And I know that there have been some court rulings where they've gone even as low as 30 days. And so this definition would then, if this was to be enacted, that would supersede these other this previous court precedent. And I think in other states where where a transient occupancy definition has been set by a certain number of days, they definitely see this shuffle. I think in a lot of places they call it, I'm from California. I know Los Angeles, it was the 28-day shuffle because it was a 30-day rule, and you move people around based on that. So that is the current definition. I think the other part that's just concerning, or maybe not concerning, but it's the hotel industry is saying that they want to do this from a safety standpoint. They say they want to be able to remove individuals who are causing a safety or a criminal activity to occur at the property. And that, that's completely, it's not genuine. That there is already that hotel operators already have that right. If someone is legitimately engaging in criminal activity, that right already exists for hotel operators. So it's disingenuous to say that they're trying to do this for safety concerns. So.
Got it. You were talking about the high numbers of folks who are cost burdened in North Carolina. Do you happen to have any data on how many of those are families with children?
We do not. That's a good question, though. That's a good call out for future for some of our future data collection. I don't think we do have that information, but I'll definitely make note of that as something that we should start collecting.
Okay, great. A quick question to the $546 million in rental and utility assistance. Is that the HOPE grants in North Carolina, and who's in charge of administering this rental and housing utility assistance money?
Yeah, so the 546, would be the next iteration of the HOPE program. So it would essentially go through the HOPE program, or it seems like they may be trying to rebrand it. But essentially, yes, it would be through the HOPE program. The money that we've seen through the HOPE program at this point has been money from the CARES Act, which was passed at this point over a year ago. The 546 million would be coming from the relief package that passed in Congress at the end of December 2020. And then, so we still know there's an additional pot that would be coming from the American Rescue Plan that passed in this past March. And so the state is sitting on potentially probably just under $1 billion in rental assistance that they are behind in getting out. We know that there are 41 states that have already started dispersing that money from that December pot. And so North Carolina is one of 9 who have not at this point. And so it's really disappointing. I think we're also just concerned because people seem to be moving on to kind of post-pandemic recovery, but there's people who they're not even at a point of being able to recover, whatever that means. They're still trying to survive the pandemic in general. So, and that money would be administered by the North Carolina Office of Recovery and Resiliency. And that's where it stands now. It should be going through NCORE. I know that they're trying to figure out how to deploy this next iteration, that $546 million. We don't see a lot of urgency from staff there, which again is concerning.
Thanks so much. We have a bunch of comments and really insightful thoughts in the chat, and I will just let folks review those on their own because I know we're running low on time. But thank you so much, Pamela.
Yeah, thanks again, Pamela. And again, folks, if you want to get more active on these housing issues, as Pamela mentioned, the Advocates Circle that's being organized by the Housing Coalition is a great way to do that. Just send me an email and I'm happy to get you connected. Wonderful. So now we are going to widen the lens a little bit and look at a variety of issues and things that are taking place in the General Assembly. So I am going to turn it over to Tiffany Gladney, our Policy Director.
Good morning. Happy Friday, y'all. It was another busy week on Jones Street, but a late development yesterday. We saw Senate Bill 172 get some movement, which is the additional COVID-19 response and relief bill. Some notable highlights out of how the Senate, this is their proposal on how we should spend the American Rescue Plan allocations. So some notable highlights include the preschool grants receiving a $5.9 million investment, infants and toddlers receiving $6.2 million, and these are both going to IDEA, and then also the child care stabilization grants of $805 million. So this bill's next stop will be Senate Rules Committee. And of course, we will keep you posted as to how this bill is progressing in the process. This was a late development yesterday. So stay tuned for more details. And also on the early childhood forefront, we saw House Bill 574, the revised child care subsidy rates bill, get some movement. And we have to stop and say, this is because of your advocacy. You guys did this and it paid off. And it's always so encouraging when you see things like this happen. So because of you guys and your advocacy and your advocates, we're so pleased to announce that this bill will be heard this Tuesday in the House Families, Children, and Aging Committee. Of course, this is the bill that focuses on stabilizing child care subsidy rates, setting the average 2018 market rate as a statewide floor. This is a 2021 priority for us here at NC Child, as well as our amazing other early childhood education coalition partners and stakeholders. So thank you for your partnership as well, because this has truly been a group effort and we have a really good coalition. So 3 of the bill sponsors will actually join us next Friday for our weekly child advocacy legislative update. So be sure to tune in next week as well. So then there's Senate Bill 570, which is the Hold Harmless Star Ratings, ERS assess. This bill proposes to hold child care facilities harmless on environmental ratings should staffing shortages affect their star rating. The bill passed out of the Senate and is now on its way to the House. So, of course, you can always access our legislative tracker if you want some real-time updates on that bill, but of course, we'll keep you posted here as well. So on the child welfare forefront, House Bill 240, y'all, this bill, formerly entitled The Standards of Student Conduct, underwent this monumental remix this week. So due to changes presented in House Education K-12 Committee, it is now called a criminal background check schools bill. The bill will now require various background checks for school staff and faculty members, but there is another standards of student conduct bill, which is House Bill 247. However, that bill has not seen any movement since March 23rd. So we'll keep tracking it to see if it picks up some momentum. Then there was Senate Bill 35, which is maximum 4-year age difference to marry under 18 years. So this is formerly known as the min lawful age to marry 18 years of age. When filed, the bill's purpose was to make 18 the minimum age to consent to marriage in North Carolina. However, during the recent Senate Judiciary Committee meeting, Wednesday afternoon, committee members passed an amendment that changes the bill dramatically. Notably, the amendment would include adding a maximum 4-year age difference for a person under 18 years of age to marry. A 16 or 17-year-old must have a guardian's permission, and a 14 or 15-year-old that is expecting a child or already has a child may marry with court approval. It is worth noting that the group of survivors who asked for the bill's introduction do not support this compromise language, many of which who were in Senate Judiciary and shared their personal stories Wednesday. So the bill has been amended and is now headed to Senate rules. So on the health front, we saw the filing of a really important bill for us at NC Child, House Bill 747, which is to merge North Carolina Health Choice and Medicaid. It's a top priority of ours, and we were thrilled to see it filed on Thursday. And this bill seeks to merge the NC Health Choice and Children's Health Insurance Program with the state's Medicaid program. Due to how new it is, the bill is still awaiting introduction on the House floor, and then of course it'll receive its committee assignments afterwards. So also House Bill 736, the timely updates to newborn screening program. This would essentially require new conditions listed on the recommended uniform screening panel, the RUSP, federally, to be added to the state's newborn screening program within 2 years of its addition to the RUSP. So this bill was filed Wednesday in the House and is currently awaiting a committee assignment as well. And then lastly, on the state level, on the environmental health forefront, House Bill 272, the revised health standard for lead, a policy proposal we are proud to support, which seeks to update the childhood lead poisoning prevention law to reduce young children's exposure to hazardous lead in drinking water. This bill is a part of NC Child's 2018 legislative agenda and remains a priority for us. The bill passed the House Environment last week and has been calendared to be heard in House Health this Tuesday, May 4th. So Tuesday, May 4th will be a busy day for us here at NC Child. And then also on a federal level, the American Families Plan, which was highlighted in President Joe Biden's State of the Union address Wednesday night, offered greater insights into what the plan will actually look like. It will include paid time off for parents, $800 billion in tax credits to working parents, and a $225 billion investment into making childcare more affordable and accessible. So when the email version of today's update goes out, links will be included. So if you would like to know more, you can just access the link. And then also yesterday afternoon, we got the great news that Senators Bill Cassidy, Bob Casey, Jean Sheehan, and also Shelley Moore, and Lisa Murkowski filed the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So this is a big victory for us just seeing it get filed. And this, of course, is legislation seeking to provide fair and reasonable accommodations in the workplace for pregnant women. And we will also include a link in our written update so you can read more about that as well. So that's it for me.
That's a lot, Tiffany. We we appreciate you staying on top of all this stuff. And it's my understanding that we will likely see the Senate version of the budget here in the next couple weeks, right?
That's right. There's a lot of talk that it's actually already done. So we're just keeping our ear to the ground and eyes peeled for, if somebody happens to drop a copy in the hall or something. That's a joke, y'all. That's a joke. So yes, it is apparently done.
So we will be very interested to see what all is in that. Let's see, do we have any questions or comments?
Y'all, if you have questions or comments about legislation or about Tiffany's update, please drop them in the chat. I have a question, Tiffany, and you may not know the answer yet because I know this bill was filed right shortly before this meeting, but Senate Bill 172, the American Rescue Plan allocation funding, I don't even know what the bill is called. I had heard that we might see some of the money spent now, or some of the money allocated now, and then them coming back later to allocate the remainder. Is that what you're seeing with this bill?
Yes, that is correct. And apparently there was also some concern about if we sit on some of the funds, what happens? Like, what if we don't spend all of the money? And apparently that is something that we shouldn't be worried about, according to some of the officials at the state's Recovery and Resilience Office. So stay tuned for that. The needs are so great that I'm sure we can find a way to spend the money. And I have an online shopping problem, so this is coming from a true shopper. So, but stay tuned for more details as the plan and bill evolves. Good question, Fawn.
Wonderful. Well, if there are no other questions, thank you for that update. And the other thing I'll remind people too is that you can always listen pretty much now to any committee meeting you can listen to in the legislature, or even watch many of them. It used to be kind of tougher to tune in remotely to some of these meetings, but now there's pretty good access if you just go to the ncleg.gov website. So sometimes it's interesting to watch these committee meetings and see how the elected leaders are talking about the issues. Okay, I'm going to move on now. Is there any announcements? Are there any announcements or updates?
I'm not seeing anything. Oh, yeah, Adam's home. Your landline's ringing, Adam. I don't see anything coming into the chat box with questions right now.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again, Pamela, for sharing information about what's going on with affordable housing in North Carolina. We will keep everyone updated on that topic as well. We have May lined up here, folks, and it's going to be good. We're going to have some elected leaders and some others joining us next Friday. We're going to be talking about early education, and we have 3 of the primary sponsors of House Bill 574 and other early education issues will be joining us. So tune in for that. On the 14th, we're going to be looking at the Early Well Initiative's Family Voices report and getting an update on that from Banu from Charlotte and Morgan from our staff, and that's going to be great as well. And then on the 21st, Senator Bergen is going to be joining us from Harnett County, and we're going to be talking about maternal health legislation and issues. So that will be great as well. So thanks, everyone. We hope you'll continue to tune in. We appreciate it, and have a wonderful day and wonderful weekend.